Hi, everybody. I'm Evan Smith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, and it is my honor and pleasure to be with you today to lead this conversation with the mayors of Austin, Houston, and San Antonio. And I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then we're going to get started with our conversation about climate, the climate issue, and the moment that we're in, and you know where we're heading, not just where we are now, but where we're going. First, Steve Adler, the mayor of Austin. He was first elected to lead the 4th largest city in Texas and the 11th largest in the United States in 2014 and re-elected in 2018. He is an attorney and one-time chief of staff and general counsel in the Texas Senate, a native of Washington, D.C., a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Texas School of Law. Ron Nirenberg is in his second term as mayor of San Antonio, the state's 2nd largest and the nation's 7th largest city. He previously served 2 terms on the San Antonio City Council. Born in Boston, raised in Austin, he has an undergraduate degree from Trinity University and a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Finally, Sylvester Turner, 2-term mayor of Houston, the largest city in Texas and the nation's 4th largest. Previously, he served 27 years in the Texas House of Representatives. Born and raised in the Acres Homes community of Houston, he has an undergraduate degree from the University of Houston and a law degree from Harvard University. Mayors, welcome. Good to be with you again.
Thanks, Evan.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with everybody.
So, let me ask what may come across as a snotty and provocative question first, Mayor Turner, and that is, we're in the middle of a public health emergency. We're in the middle of an economic collapse. We're in the middle of a reckoning on race. Who gives a rip about climate in the middle of this?
Everyone, Evan, because it's all interrelated. Quite frankly, when you're talking about the climate, it affects the economy, it affects race, it impacts our health, and many of the groups that are impacted by all three. I mean, people, for example, who live in marginal communities or living on the margins of life, they're impacted, for example, when you're dealing with COVID-19, and the numbers bear that out. When you're dealing, for example, with hurricanes, I can attest with Hurricane Harvey, many of the same groups were impacted by that. And when you're dealing with the economy, and things slow down and sales tax go down dramatically, and people lose their jobs or get furloughed and worrying about how to pay their rent or their mortgage. These same populations are disproportionately impacted. And it all connects with the climate because these storms are coming with greater frequency and greater intensity.
Mayor Adler, you know, I'm inclined to ask you if in a state like Texas, where we produce the most crude oil of any state and where we tend to be more conservative with a small c politically, and therefore, as these things go, a little bit less open to an honest conversation about climate science. If this is a tough state to do this in, if I were talking to the mayors of San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego, would you have a more optimistic view of our ability to get our hands on this issue than 3 mayors of cities in Texas?
I don't think so, and the reason for that is that so much of the work that has to be done on the climate is done locally. You know, everybody gathered in Paris, the countries all gathered. People didn't know that that was also the meeting of the largest collection of mayors from around the world in one place at the same time, doing a mayor's accord on climate. Over half of the indicated actions are done locally. Locally is where a lot of the buying decisions are made with respect to energy. We own our own energy company here in Austin, but this is where the decisions are made about fleets. This is where the decisions are made about how we build and what we take into account when we build. Cities are where you're doing your resiliency planning. So long as we get to partner with mayors like Mayor Nirenberg and Mayor Turner, then this state is going to be moving forward on climate.
Mayor Nirenberg, let me ask you a version of the questions I just asked Mayor Turner and Mayor Adler. You know, I used to be the editor of Texas Monthly once upon a time, and there was a month in which we put Nolan Ryan, when he was pitching for the Houston Astros, or after he had been pitching for the Astros, on the cover of the magazine, and it didn't sell. And I turned to my colleague, Paul Burka, and I said, I wonder why this didn't sell. And he said, wrong sport, wrong city. No offense, Mr. Mayor Turner. He said, you got to put a Dallas Cowboy on the cover. Wrong sport, wrong city. And I wonder if, in fact, this is a case of wrong issue, wrong state, right? Climate is a tough sell in Texas. And at the moment, this issue, given everything else we're dealing with, is a tough one to get people to pay attention to.
Well, I'll use your word, Evan. You called this moment in time for America a reckoning, and I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yep.
The pandemic has brought into clarity a lot of the underlying issues of our community. We know that the economic crisis, for instance, is hitting hardest on marginalized communities, lower income communities, communities of color. We know that the health crisis is the same way. We have Latinos in Texas are dying 4 times at the 4 times the rate of white Texans with regard to the crisis of the pandemic itself. Blacks 2.4 times fast at a higher rate. So these crises are creating an intersection of challenges.
Yep.
And the truth of the matter is, here in Texas, our politics may be a little more challenging with regard to the climate issue, but we know the climate issue also impacts marginalized communities at a greater rate, at a higher impact. Yep. And so if it can be done in Texas, it can be done anywhere. And the truth of the matter is the 3 of us are dealing with issues on the ground daily, locally. We have direct impact, and we are getting it done. You see the changing portfolios of our energy utilities. You see the work that's being done on transportation in our built environment. And we're showing that even despite these challenges, we're able to make a difference. And that's what needs to happen on a grander scale in this moment of reckoning.
Mayor Turner, you understand running a city that is larger than many states, that bandwidth is a problem. If you're the mayor of a city like Houston, you've got, under normal circumstances, so many balls in the air, so many plates spinning. Again, I come back to the moment you're in. You're dealing with the pandemic. Houston has been disproportionately hit hard by that. The economic collapse has disproportionately hit the city of Houston hard. George Floyd was from Houston. The racial reckoning has a real personal through line for the city of Houston. Do you really have the bandwidth to think about this now? I understand that the answer is often, well, we have no choice but to think about it. But as a practical matter, as mayor, do you have the bandwidth to think about this issue?
Well, and I'm going to repeat what you just said, Evan. We don't have a choice. For mayors, we're on the front line. We have to produce results. And that's why it's very important for us to partner with one another. You know, I'm frequently on the telephone or on the Zoom call, or you name it, with Mayor Nuremberg or Mayor Adler and other Texas mayors in the city of Houston. But we don't have a choice. And if I could just add a little bit to that last question too. For us, Hurricane Harvey was a game changer. When more rain fell on this city than any other city on the North American continent, when the city of Houston faced 3 500-year storms in 3 consecutive years, 15, 16, and 17, Tropical Storm Imelda in 2019. So we don't have a choice. We've had to do everything we can to expand our bandwidth, to put ourselves in a position to be stronger, more resilient, more sustainable. We're working with different entities. Bloomberg, for example, has been in here since I've been mayor, assisting as well. We're partnering public-private initiatives. We're partnering with the private sector, you know, to do things that the city itself is not in a position to do. Just like on our Evolve program dealing with electric vehicles. You know, we are partnering with Shell, Centerpoint, the utility here in the city of Houston, University of Houston, NRG. So it's not about just focusing on what the municipality can do. It's about looking around for partners, for collaborations, working with other mayors at all levels, working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and even looking for partnerships with the state and the federal government.
Are you finding, Mr. Turner, that the corporations that you just named and others are more open as time goes on to addressing this issue with you in partnership?
They're more open when they look and recognize the fact that these storms are coming with greater frequency and greater intensity, and where their people and their assets are at risk. Harvey in the state of Texas, and particularly in our region, was a game changer. And years ago, you would have been reluctant to find corporations joining with the municipality talking about a climate action plan. Okay. Right. And years ago, you would have been reluctant to have the mayor of the city of Houston, energy capital of the world, talking about a climate action plan. Right. Post Harvey, you have both working in collaboration with one another because it's in everybody's best interest to do so.
Mayor Nuremberg, Mayor Adler, obviously, for Houston, as Mayor Turner says, this is personal in every respect, right? Hurricane Harvey was this extraordinary event. And, we just dodged a bullet in the last couple of weeks with another series of hurricanes that we thought might cruelly in the same week of the Harvey anniversary might hit the city again. Thank God that they didn't. But in a city like Houston, you can see that the imperative is great for corporations and other non-government actors to step up and partner. In San Antonio and Austin, maybe not so much because Harvey is not as much of an impetus. But Mayor Nirenberg, are you finding that your version of the list of companies that Mayor Turner mentioned are as amenable to having this conversation now, maybe more so than when you first got into office?
Yeah, I think maybe for different reasons. Our experience with hurricanes is in disaster response. We play as a partner, a relief valve for our region. But we have our corporations, and we have our CPS Energy, which is a largest publicly owned electric and gas utility in the country, who are at the table working on this with us, because I think they see that it's positively impactful to their bottom line. They also see the public policy mandates, frankly. Public's attitudes have changed about the importance of climate change, and we have to make that part of our business mission to change with it. And the truth of the matter is also, we see the social determinants of health through the lens of climate action. And that's something that has been abundantly clear during this pandemic.
Mayor Adler, the pressure point from sort of events out in the world, Hurricane Harvey hits and corporations now worry that their physical plant is at risk in a city like Houston, and they've got to do something about this. That's one set of pressure points. But what Mayor Nirenberg just referred to is just as valid, and that is that the public, the consumer base for a lot of these companies, their politics now drive their decision, and they want to do business with good civic and corporate actors. And so there may be kind of the public ground up pressure on some of these same corporations to partner with governments like the government in Austin, right?
No question. And you can even take that, I'll extend out even one stage further. There are the businesses that do it because of the immediacy in Houston. Yeah. It's the public in San Antonio. Companies are supporting it here because the workforce that they want to have work for them want to live in cities that are at the cutting edge of climate change interaction. Right. Our economy is strong now in part because of the companies that are here, and they're here in part because of the branding of this city. Right. These companies are here because the workforce they want to hire in today's world want to live in a city that is progressive. The economy isn't good here despite our positions on the environment and climate change. Our economy is because of that.
Right. Mayor Adler, staying with you for a second, back on the question of the economy, a little bit like what we just talked about, can you afford to do it? Well, can you afford not to do it? This would be the argument you'd be having with yourself in normal economic times. But especially in the middle of an economic downturn, it's reasonable to ask whether a mayor like you or the other mayors who have all recognized the impact of these last 6 months on your current and future budgets, and you're having to pull the belt tighter. You're having to consider how you're going to be able to run your cities in a much more austere way. Do you really have the money to spend right now on programs that would address this issue, especially at this moment?
Well, we may be one of the case studies for that question here in Austin right now. Yeah. We're about to undertake probably the largest single investment in preserving the climate that we have ever done. We're taking a $7 billion tax measure to the voters in November in order to be able to establish a regional transit system in our city. And we were decades in the preparation for this moment, several years with 60,000 people in the community, all pointing to this election in November, everybody all dressed up and ready to go to the party to dig deep and say, let's invest in this moment. And then all this stuff hit. And we started looking at each other in May and June and July and asked ourselves exactly the question you just asked, is in this time when people are hurting, In this moment, is this really the time to be going to the voters to ask for this kind of an investment? And we came to the conclusion that now more than ever, people are going to come out of COVID here. And when we do, all of us across the country are aspiring to be a better selves.
Right.
People are addressing equity issues. They're addressing access issues. People are spending a lot of time at home watching the disparities in their community and understanding and not being able to look away, perhaps as we did in the past. So for us, we changed kind of the name of the rallying cry. It is Transit Now, in this moment, at this time, especially now.
Mayor Nuremberg, there's a part of me that thinks you're going to have to build the economy back up anyway. You may as well build it back greener, right? In some ways, this is the best opportunity for you to do this because there's going to have to be significant work done in each of your cities to get the economy stood back up here after this is all over. Why not build into the recovery plan many of the things you've been talking about anyway?
That's absolutely right. I couldn't agree more with what Steve is saying about that. You address these issues at a foundational level. And in San Antonio, that foundational issue is education and workforce. So we have major initiatives on the ballot on both ends of the educational pipeline to make, I think, what will be the most significant generational impact on poverty in this city. As we also are putting on the ballot a future measure for public transportation. So you're absolutely right. It's built on equity. And if we are truly addressing equity, it is the challenge of climate action because all of these measures fall disproportionately on lower income communities, communities of color, and the marginalized.
The question, Mayor Turner, that you both referred to this, and so has Mayor Nuremberg, the intersectional nature of climate. Climate is not an issue that stays in its own lane. Climate is a race issue. Climate is a housing issue. Climate is a transportation issue, right? Climate is more of a horizontal issue. It cuts across various things.
Right.
Specifically on the issue of race, you three are in cities with a high percentage of Texans of color, residents of color. As you referred to earlier, and Mayor Nuremberg as well, the pandemic has had a disproportionately negative impact on communities of color. The economic collapse has as well. I'm a student of your fellow Houstonian, Dr. Robert Bullard, who is the great sort of sermonizer on the question of climate justice. He's the person who put the intersection of race and climate before me, before anybody else did. Can you talk a little bit about that as an issue in a state that is diversifying as much as Texas and as much as your cities are, how those two things really do intersect as a practical matter?
And Professor Bullock is well respected. I mean, when it comes to talking about environmental justice, he's been speaking on it for quite some time. You have many communities, neighborhoods, for example, occupied by people of color, in large part where they're dealing with high levels of air pollution or land pollution, where sanitary landfills have been for years and years and years. In the city of Houston, a particular community, for example, Sunnyside, there's 300 acres that are contaminated. They've been that way for a long time. And those 300 acres have pulled down that community for quite some time. And the question is, you can't revitalize or reimagine that community until you deal with this particular issue. What we're doing now is taking a look at the 300 acres and looking at how we can turn that into one of the largest urban solar farms in the city of Houston, where we are reimagining and repurposing that property. And we think to the extent we can do that, we will turn around that low income community for the better. On the other side, in Northeast Houston, low income community, and where the cancer rate has been way too high. We've been dealing with TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, with the EPA, with the railroad, about how to address that. And they've been impacted. That has impacted that area for the last 30 years. And we're looking at now how we can turn that around, environmental racism. And then in Northwest Houston, in the part of town where I live, where I grew up, still live, we're dealing with these concrete plants that are all over, for example, the city of Houston, which are helping to pull down those neighborhoods and those communities, impacting directly people's health. And we need more support, for example, from the state and addressing that and regulating where these facilities are being located, how they're being licensed and permitted. So in many of these communities, they're not just having to deal with hurricanes that will come, and they're not having to deal with a pandemic, but they're also having to deal with landfills of things that have been placed in their communities over the last decades that are continuing to have a detrimental impact on their health, as well as on their economy and their quality of life, and how we can transform these communities for the better.
Mayor Adler, I'm thinking about a phenomenon that I've been made aware of in Austin. It is certainly not unique to Austin, but it was described to me as climate gentrification. The problem that the road to good intentions sometimes leads you astray. And in communities of color, where there have been efforts on the part of municipalities to address some of these issues, what it's ultimately done is displaced communities of color along the way. It's solved one problem, but in the course of doing so, created another. Is that something that you're attuned to as the mayor of a city like Austin?
No question. And I think it really takes a really specific focus on the difference between gentrification and displacement.
Yeah.
You know, you have a neighborhood that has significant crime and no parks. You go in as a community to give those residents, you know, you get rid of crime, you put in a lot of amenities, and the next thing you know, everybody that's living there can't afford to live there because now it's a desirable place, and everybody else wants to move there, and property values go up.
Right.
And you don't want to not get rid of crime or get rid of parks. But what you have to do is do those things and still maintain the presence of the communities and the neighborhoods that are there. So you really need to focus on displacement. The difficult thing in focusing on displacement is that with market values going up, you have to have activities that are counter market, that are outside of the market in order to be able to preserve people. In Texas, we don't have a lot of the tools that are available to many cities around the country in terms of rent controls and other kinds of things that we can't do in our state. But we can do investments where we offer density bonuses in exchange for permanent affordability being built into our communities. We can have rental relief programs. We can do a lot of the things, frankly, that we're now doing during this pandemic in order to sustain communities. And now we're looking at them and saying, you know, we thought we were doing this good before, but this moment has required us to even sharpen our tools. This is a tool that will survive this. And in the transit bond that we're doing, going to community in November, in part because of these conversations, there is a $300 million investment, separate and apart from building the transit line, dedicated funding, focused on nothing but anti-displacement strategies. And work in order to be able to make sure that the people that live there, the neighborhoods that exist, get to enjoy the benefit of this transit as well.
Mayor Nierenberg, same question to you. How do you address this? I think about San Antonio, I think about the sprawl of San Antonio, right, in Bexar County, how everything feels to me so flat and spread out so far. How do you address this issue without creating inadvertent, unintended consequences for the communities that would be impacted by this?
Yeah, it's a significant challenge, and I'll say that it is a significant challenge, particularly with a municipally owned utility, where in many cases wages and income levels are depressed. So what we've done over the years is really focus on how we can begin to move our electrical grid into a more resilient direction, but also provide options for doing so. For instance, we just released an RFI on the market. It's going to be for 1,500 megawatts of renewable and battery storage energy. And we hope to, within the next year, begin to receive proposals to install what would make us the #1 solar energy producer in the nation. If we can do that and build that kind of resiliency into our grid and also provide our consumers options for being part of that, we can keep our rates among the lowest in the nation. So it's given us a certain amount of pressure. We've got to keep focused on keeping rates affordable across the income spectrum, but we're trying to make those products available so that anybody can partake in them.
Mayor Turner, as somebody who served in the legislature, as I said, for more than a quarter century, you understand the way Austin works and the balance of power between the legislature and state elected officials on the one hand, and this, what I would describe as the kind of illusion of local control on the other hand, that has become a through line in so many of our conversations over the last several years, where on the one hand, you all control things until Austin doesn't like that, and then they swoop in and they tell you what you have to do. The mayors have essentially been left to deal with this climate issue on their own, now working in collaboration, but largely it's fallen to you all to step up. It's not that you're being forced to do it, you're doing it willingly, you're doing it enthusiastically, but why isn't the state more part of this conversation? Why isn't the federal government part of this conversation? Why is it up to you all to solve this?
Well, Evan, I think you could probably answer that question for us, for
yes,
for
but
all
I'm
of us as
asking.
well.
Yeah, I'm going to make you answer. Go ahead. Why is it?
Look, it is unfortunate that when we're talking about climate action, that there is no federal or state mandate. It is unfortunate. I mean, it was at the federal level that they withdrew from the Paris Accord.
Right.
And at the state level, there is no state mandate. All three of us, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, we all have our own climate action plans, and we're all moving in the same direction. You know, years ago, people could argue whether or not climate change was real. I think that argument is settled. Yeah. I think it's settled at this point.
There are even people on the other side politically from you, Mayor Turner, who fully acknowledge that climate change is real. They may disagree about what you do with that knowledge, right? But the fight has largely been waged and it's over.
And it's over. And so the question is, you know, where do we go from here? And if there's a failure to act at the federal and state level, then local governments have no choice but to act. Right. And that's why you have over 480 municipalities, cities across this country, from blue as well as red cities, who have signed on to the Paris Accord. And many are committed to get there to decarbonize carbon neutrality even sooner than 2050. And right. We're aggressively moving in that direction. I mean, look, just like everything, there's a schism that exists between the various levels, and the people will have to resolve that. I mean, in November, people have the opportunity to vote, and I think people, the voters themselves, will have to remove this schism, and hopefully people will exercise their right to vote. I will tell you that on the ballot in November is climate change. And on the ballot in November is what's happening in our cities, what's happening in our communities, what's happening on your neighborhood, on your street, in your park. Right. All of those things are on the ballot. And so when people are concerned about their children and those suffering with asthma, when they're concerned about whether or not there's a disproportionate impact in people's neighborhoods have been impacted by cancer, when they're concerned about the storms coming into the Gulf, 2 hurricanes at one time, all of those things are on the ballot in November, and hopefully people will vote not just by climate change, because it impacts everything else, as you've indicated earlier.
You know, Mayor Adler, this is one of those elections have consequences moments that we see every couple of years, and we preach to people without regard to who they should vote for, that being actively involved in these issues gives you some agency over how they get resolved. If you choose to sit on the sidelines, you have no agency, right? So it's a moment for us to remind people that if they vote, they have the ability to have their voice heard on this stuff. My question to you is, where along the threshold here is it important? Is the presidential election most important to the resolution of this? Are the congressional elections most important to the resolution of this? Is the control of the Texas House something that probably we four could talk about over a beer for hours and hours and not have enough time, but the average person may not see the significance of who is the majority of the Texas House? Is that the important thing? Like, what do you tell people in terms of how they should engage in November?
Well, the good thing is that all of these choices are on the same ballot.
Yeah, but there's no straight ticket voting, so you have to get people to pay attention, unfortunately.
Start at the top and work your way all the way down to the bottom. You know, I don't think that the choices are clear, and there's such divergence right now on such basic issues. I mean, this really is going back to how you started. This is a reckoning. This is a moment. There is a fork in the road, and people get to pick. And I am encouraged by how many people I think are going to vote in November. I think that the participation level is going to go through the roof. And what I am most excited about is the number of young people that apparently are going to vote. In Austin, Texas, for years, you know, if you wanted to get elected, you had to pay attention to people who were over 55, because they were the ones that turned out to vote. And quite frankly, they controlled a lot of the policy and the decisions that happened. But in the election that we just had a few weeks ago, almost 40% of the people that voted were under 40. That has never happened in our city before. And so I'm excited. People need to vote.
Mayor Nuremberg, one of the things we know about the 2022 elections in Texas, when we have the next statewide elections, is that 1 out of every 3 eligible voters will be under the age of 30, to Mayor Adler's point. And just as elections matter, generational change matters. The fact is that younger people, regardless of party preference, seem to be much more open to having the conversation that we've been having for the last 30 minutes.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that younger voters are keenly aware of the consequences of decisions to invest in their communities. And that's one of the things that we're hopeful about. It is ironic, though, that I think we have 2 of the oldest nominees that we've ever had in the nation at the top of the ballot.
Right, Donald Trump is the young one. How about that? How about an election?
But it is true. There is probably, yeah, there on the issue of climate change, you know, the choices couldn't be clearer. And this, among many other issues, makes it the most consequential presidential election of our lifetimes. So, you know, I think my colleague said it very well. We can either have a partner in federal government or we can have someone who's working against us. And we know that how that has been over the last 4 years. The cities can do a lot, but they can't do it all. We need to have partnership.
Right.
Good. We have hit our time to end, and I want you all to know how much it was great to be with you again. It's fun to see you even in these little boxes on my computer. Hopefully one day soon we'll be talking about climate change in person again. But for now, I want to thank Mayor Nuremberg, Mayor Turner, Mayor Adler, everybody at Climate Mayors for putting this on, giving me the opportunity to lead this conversation, and of course, everybody who joined us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Thanks. Take care.